And a very warm welcome from Talking Industry, from Greenwich in my case, where it's not quite as cold as it has been. So as we're discussing energy efficiency, that's good news, at least from a domestic point of view. Today's session is going to be on energy efficiency, achieving net zero and reducing energy consumption. My name is Andy Pye. I'm consultant editor at DFA Media, and we publish a range of print and online publications in the manufacturing and automation sector. So we've got three excellent speakers today, and they're going to discuss the subject of how the manufacturing community can play its part in global decarbonisation, and perhaps equally importantly, if not more so, how to save money on energy consumption and what steps are involved. Normally I introduce our speakers in reverse order, but one of them is going to appear twice today, so I've decided to be more conventional and go from the top down. So our first speaker will be GAMBICA's sector head for industrial automation, Nikesh Mistry. He will talk on a cross-sectoral sustainability group that GAMBICA has introduced and how its members are using automation to enhance the reduction of their carbon footprint. We're then going to go to Alan Baird, who's country manager UK and Ireland for Danfoss, and his first presentation will be just a quick overview of having attended COP26 and what his impressions are from that meeting and going forward. Then we'll go to David Pownall, who is Vice President of Services UK and Ireland for Schneider Electric. He's going to talk about how cutting-edge technology on its own may not be enough to solve the biggest challenges, focusing on issues of data-driven insights and digital services. And then we'll go back to Alan, and he's going to talk about some of the technologies which can contribute to saving energy, improving energy efficiency, and so on. Between those presentations, as we always do, we'll have discussions, and those discussions will involve not only our speakers, but everyone who's attending at the same time. So we'd like to encourage you to post your questions at any time, and you do that in the chat. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with how Zoom works, but if not, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of buttons. If the chat isn't there, press on the three dots with the more word underneath it, and you'll see the chat. In my case, it's fourth down, so that's probably typically. That accesses the chat, then you can contribute via the chat function. Don't use the Q&A because it means we've got two things to look at, so it's easier if everything goes into the chat. During the meeting, we'll also introduce some polls for you to answer, just to get a feel for where you are on your energy efficiency journey, your net zero journey. And my colleague, who you can't see, but you may hear from time to time, Andy Wiley, will be helping me with running those polls. And the final thing is that we do have the facility now in Zoom to enable our attendees to speak to us. And we may or may not invoke that, but it's possible that you may have a question that you'd actually like to ask the panelists in person. And if that's the case, put a message in the chat, prefaced by the word speaker, and then I'll know that that's what you want to do, and I'll want to know what it's about so that I can decide if it's appropriate and when. So hopefully all of that is as clear as it can be. The chat will also be used for putting information from our panelists so that you have a reference to take away with you about everything that was discussed during the meeting. We do ask attendees not to put their own commercial information in the chat, but if you have objective comments or even, you know, non-commercial publications which might help the overall position, then we're fine with that. So please don't use it as a source of commercial information. Okay, I think that's it. So we're ready to go, and we'll kick off, as I said, with Nikesh, who will introduce himself and then explain to us what his new Cross-sectoral Sustainability Group is all about. Over to you, Nikesh.
Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for coming to listen to us today. I am, as Andy mentioned, the sector head for industrial automation at GAMBICA. So for those who don't know, GAMBICA, we are the trade association for industrial automation, laboratory technology, process instrumentation, control and test and measurement, and university engagement in the UK. We have about 240 plus member companies who get together in various special interest groups to discuss trends in the market overview, policy, ways in which we can actually help industry gain best practice in all the different sectors that we've discussed. And myself, I look after the industrial automation sector, to which Schneider and Danfoss are both members. So as Andy mentioned, I'm going to discuss a little bit about what GAMBICA are doing in the space of the sustainability, decarbonisation areas. But just to sort of set the scene a bit, discussions that we've been having amongst our membership are the pressures that manufacturers have been facing over the past 5 years. Is it now? Maybe even more. You've got the pandemic, the global pandemic. You've got the pressures of the global supply chain. You've got Brexit, the recent invasion of Ukraine, and then all of that is leading into the increase in energy costs, which are causing pressures in both the supply chain and actually in trying to gain new customers in the production of actually what manufacturers are making, also trying to gain components. So the increase in energy costs are causing quite a lot of disruption amongst the membership that we're seeing. And despite these headwinds in the automation market, we have a different level of resilience to this. And what I mean by this is we've seen good trends in the industrial automation sector in terms of sales production. And the reason for this is many of our members are selling products such as variable speed drives, soft starters, condition monitoring apparatus, preventative maintenance devices, things like this, which if you implement them in the right applications, in the right areas, you'll find that they're going to assist you in your decarbonisation journey. Now, I'm not going to talk about that too much because I'm going to let the experts take that away and let you know a bit more detail about that. But that is the sort of the scene that we're creating in the industrial automation market. And at GAMBICA, what we have done recently is we've created a group which is cross-sectoral, invites all of the different GAMBICA sectors together, and they are creating a spreadsheet or a list of parameters by which each member will log, their carbon emissions. They'll look at their energy costs. They'll look at, there's about 16 different parameters that they'll go up against. And then we're going to compare that to industry averages and try and ensure that all of our member companies are at least reaching the industry average for what we're seeing. So it's some exciting new developments, and shows how many of our members will actually want to get involved in doing this at the moment. Andy, I think you're on mute.
I'm just unmuting myself, the old school way error there. Okay, so you're quite early on in this journey at the moment. I mean, do you have any early indications of, where different sectors might lie, or how changes might be as a function of company size, for example?
Yes, that's an interesting one, actually. And at the moment, we don't have any of the data because it was launched yesterday. It was a big launch that we had at the lab conference for the GAMBICA lab conference yesterday. So we haven't received any of the data. However, you're very right in talking about the size of companies and how it can differ in terms of the funding that they might have to be able to get on this journey. But what we're seeing in the SMEs at the moment is there's a big big push for trying to achieve a cost saving, because I think cost saving is becoming more important than ever before, especially when all the costs are going up. So it's not only energy needs to be saved, but the cost of components, cost of labor, cost of all overheads in buildings, when people are working from home and they need to rent, those sorts of things have gone up as well. So I think businesses are looking at all areas in which they can save costs, and energy is becoming one of the ones that's screaming out to everyone at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's bring in our other panelists and get their take on, because they will be viewing a lot of their own customers and seeing what priorities they have. Let me start with David, and I suppose those same two questions. Do you see across sectors? And as I speak, I'm thinking, obviously an aluminium smelter is going to have very different priorities to a food manufacturer, for example. So I guess that's understandable. There could be factors of company size, and also to what extent, and we talked a little about this in our pre-meeting. We're very organised. We always have a pre-meeting, and we plan to do that usually 2 weeks before. So in this case, we did it yesterday, so it's hot off the press. But the question was about, has increasing costs made a greater incentive towards the energy efficiency and the net zero debate? So let me ask David for his comments on those questions.
Yeah, I'll start with the last question first, if I may, Andy. And
yes.
And yeah, the short answer is yes, it has. I think whether or not it's being done for the right reasons, the net effect is carbon reduction is part of reacting to this energy crisis, and manufacturing is facing it probably worse than any other sector because they operate on slightly slimmer margins to begin with. They're also some of the largest energy consumers. I mean, they account for something like, I think global manufacturing is something like 20% of the entire global emissions for carbon come from manufacturing. So it's a big sector that historically has not done a lot to address that. We've still got all of the wonderful aspirations of 2050 net zero and all the rest of it there, but ultimately the thing that's driving the behaviour is the energy crisis at the moment. I think Make UK did a study that said something like 60-70%, I think it is, of all manufacturers believe that the energy crisis is going to have an impact on whether they even remain relevant as a business or not. And when you start thinking about a statistic like that, and the energy costs for manufacturing, who are typically not protected and weren't particularly well prepared with how they managed the sourcing of their energy prior to this crisis, have seen increases of over 100% in the last 12 months, and they will absolutely see another 100% increase in the next 12 months, no question. Even with the energy costs starting to stabilize again, it's going to take at least another year for the system to flush. So there's a ton of very anxious people out there, and that's driving, they're all doing the panic actions, as in, what can I do? Turn the lights off, lower the heating, all of those kind of things. But there's we're at a bit of an inflection point, Andy, is kind of where my head's at, because we're facing not just an energy crisis. Manufacturing's facing a huge skills gap at the moment. I think the statistic is something like 40% of all of the technical skills that exist in manufacturing globally, will retire in the next 5 to 7 years. As an industry, we're not hiring enough people or training enough people to even get anywhere close to tackling that issue, and we've kind of been sleepwalking into it at the same time as this digital explosion, or what are we calling it, industry 4.0, electricity 4.0 is occurring, the fourth industrial revolution, where we need more connected, we need more smart, we need more highly skilled people to be able to make those systems work. So there's a number of different inflection points all occurring in this melting pot at the same time. We know with every industrial revolution for the last 4, at least in the last 250 years, There's been an electrical revolution with each of them, and this is the digital one. And that's where I'm seeing, certainly in manufacturing, is really now starting to wake up and almost take a lead compared to some of its other peer sectors in recognizing, we know the facts. Electricity is, depending on how you source, is at least 3 to 5 times more efficient than any other energy source. So we know it's a good thing, but how you harness it, how you measure it, how you analyze it, they've been the things that have been typically difficult to achieve, because you're always dealing with a legacy installed base or an existing manufacturing system that was designed maybe 20 years ago, when these things weren't an issue and when no one was thinking about them. So that's the area now, with the price points dropping so fast in the digital enabled world, or the connected product, or whatever you want to call it, where we're starting to see companies connect. Then the real challenge is, what do you do with the data? Because people are paralyzing themselves with tons of data and not really understanding the starting point. And the reason often is because they don't have a base point or a foundation or a line in the sand where they're starting from. So that's our view of what's going on at the moment, Andy.
There's a huge amount to take account of there, isn't there, and how the interrelationships might play out. I can't immediately see a link, for example, between the skills shortage and the energy costs, but there may well be one. But they're all problems that we're having to grapple with simultaneously, which I guess is what you're saying.
They are, but I mean, you need skilled people in your workforce to deal with those issues, right? Or you start to rely on companies like Danfoss or Schneider Electric or whoever else you want to rely on or partner with. The issue is, we're facing the same issue. So the availability of skilled resources to move quickly to implement whatever it is that you need to implement to, remain viable as a manufacturing organization is hampered by that. So it is linked, because it actually it causes us all to slow down when you don't have the available skilled resources to deliver. So there's a link there for sure.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask Alan in a minute just to give his comments as well, and then after that maybe get Nikesh to talk on the training issue as well, which I think is one of his strengths. I did see a poll flash up, so hopefully Andy can help me, because for whatever reason it's disappeared on my screen. But we had a poll that we wanted our attendee, there it is, a poll, and it's already running, so there we go. It's just my screen that had disappeared. And the question was, do you know what your current energy cost is? And actually it's quite encouraging looking at these answers, that 65% of our audience say that they do know what their current energy cost is. And the remainders are not so sure. Is that something that would surprise you, David, or is that higher than you might expect?
No, I'm absolutely certain that they know what their gas and their electricity cost is. I think it's when you ask the next detailed question, which is, where's your biggest points of energy consumption? Where are your biggest points of energy loss? And how granular can you measure it? We know for a fact, I mean, the UK particularly is terrible on connecting any equipment, and have been for a long time. Something like 90% of all electrical panels, as an example, that my consultants analyze for our customers, have either connections that haven't been made or enabled, or don't have a connection at all. Now, when you think about metering, and when you think about needing to get to that granular level to be able to drive out waste or optimize usage, that's where the real devil in the detail starts to kick in. So no, I'm not surprised that everyone knows the headline numbers. I'd love to understand how detailed that knowledge is of their energy consumption.
Fabulous. Well, you put your money where your mouth is. So the second question that's just going up is, do you have visibility of your largest energy losses? So we'll see what they say.
I'll be interested.
In the meantime, Alan, what is your take on that whole perspective?
No, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thanks just also to the audience who have have joined the session. Just a suggestion, if we can put a poll as well, I'd be interested to see the people who know how much they're paying, if we could get a span of what the costs are, because some people have been tied into longer term agreements. Some people are coming out of those. I visited Data Center World last week in London. We were exhibiting there, as were Schneider. Great show, I thought, very well attended. Some really, really good quality visitors. And I was speaking to somebody towards the end of day one who was aware of companies that were going into tariffs of 70 pence per kilowatt hour. That's what they're facing. You know, it must be frightening. It must be frightening. Some examples where we've done, for example, studies of sites, and we're looking at calculating return on investment based on 10 pence per kilowatt hour. Multiply that by 7 or 8. You know, the ROI really comes in, but it's a frightening prospect for people who are running businesses who are going to be faced with that very, very soon. So just 2 points as well, and things that David covered, if you don't mind me saying as well. Andy put you on the spot, David, about the linkage between cost of energy and the skills gap that we have, and it's going to be amplified. I think there is a real linkage. I think that what we'll probably see, and I hope that we see, is that some of the younger generation potential engineers that could move into the industry see not so much energy cost, but the frightening scenario of CO2 emissions and climate change, and how that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. So I'm really hoping that we see more graduates or younger people coming in to the industry that help to span that gap in skills that we're going to have. And the driver isn't probably the cost of electricity. It is about the damaging effects of emissions, including CO2, that are going to have, because I think a lot of people get it. And I think a lot of the younger people probably really get it, because they're inheriting things that we're doing, and ones before us have done as well. But I think there's a conscience there within that part of our society that hopefully we will benefit from. So I think that's a point I wanted to mention. Not wanting to contradict something that David said, very, 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 very informative person, and thanks there, David. But just slightly more frightening statistic, my understanding from the International Energy Agency is that in industry, the CO2 related emissions is 39%. And in buildings, I think it was 28% CO2 related emissions from those two sectors, nearly 70%.
Yeah.
That's pretty scary. And that's what I say, this discussion on industry for sure, but we should be considering buildings, data centers, huge consumers as well of electricity. So, and we think about industry, we think about big chimney with smoke coming out, think as well water and wastewater. So I would add some of those into the mix as well, because if we don't do that, we don't recognise the opportunities. And the best bit is, for me, we can make significant improvements now. We don't need to wait. The technology is here, the expertise is here. We can make a difference now. But we can't wait. We can't afford to wait. We need to try to enable our customers with products and with knowledge, and support what they want to do in making these investments. I think David made a great point. There's people there that know how much they're actually paying for the gas and electricity, but they may well appreciate guidance and conversations about how we actually find the real hotspots and how we positively affect them for the customer's benefit, for society's benefit.
Yes, and that raises so many interesting points as well. It's hard to know which order to take them in, but the first thing I'm going to say is to our audience. Alan threw down the gauntlet there and said, give us some real figures. Well, we'd love to hear your real figures, which you could put in the chat anonymously if you wish. I mean, we're not going to share these with anybody. But it would be great to have those figures. And if you actually wanted to speak to us, as I said earlier, then you know, by all means, it would be nice to have one or two people who could talk about their own individual circumstances on that subject. Now, coming back to the poll, and I'm sorry, Nikesh, I will get back to you in a moment because I'm sure you've got plenty to say. We have got the results of that second poll now, and it is happily pretty much what David predicted it would be, which is that 2/3 of the audience actually don't have visibility of what their largest energy losses are, and that is very much giving us the opportunity to help in quite a considerable way. And we will be covering some of those technologies a little bit later in this this presentation. And we have a question which is, you know, what technologies are available to us to start helping those make those improvements. And Alan and David in particular will be talking about that a little bit later on. On young people, I totally agree with what Alan said. I've found in many cases it's hard to mobilize young people for a cause. But the one exception, funnily enough, I had a curry last night with some of my cricket coaches, and we got onto the subject of climate change, and that's the one thing that the young coaches are very passionate about, and will get them onto the streets is climate change for the very reasons you say, that you know, it's a problem that we've handed them, and they are going to be the people who are left solving it, hopefully at least with our help. Training, Nikesh, well, you know, there's training and training, isn't there? Because how long does it take to train engineers? You know, it's one thing to go through, you know, a university degree or equivalent apprenticeship or whatever, but that's only the start, isn't it? And there's an awful lot of on-job training that also needs to be done. So that skills gap, I think, is if anything, even bigger than it initially appears to be. Nikesh, I'm sure you're desperate to talk.
As always. No, I completely agree with that. Actually, it's a very, very interesting point to make about younger generations, especially what Alan was talking about, how the society of the younger generation, we see that they are genuinely passionate for changing the environment for what it is. They don't want to do it for the energy, for the cost saving. It's for actually saving the environment and our planet. And it's actually quite ironic because we live in a younger society where they want, you know, generally the younger generations are used to getting everything yesterday. In the current world we live in, you know, with subscription-based services, Netflix and Deliveroo and things, you know, you order something now, you get it within the next few hours. And that's the society we live in today. Whereas when it comes to climate change, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's something that they're all passionate about, but it's a longevity. It's not something that they can change right now. Yet they're all still very, very passionate about it. It's something that we've also discovered at GAMBICA in our new Young Council. So we formed a council of, we call it the Young Council, but it's individuals in the first 10 years of their career. So they're not necessarily all young. Some of them might be a little bit older than others, but they're all within the first 10 years of their career. And they formed a council with 3 different areas of interest. And one of those areas is sustainability. And that sustainability group is formed of, it's got a mixture of individuals who might have been in one or two of them had done apprenticeships, 2 of them had been in university, couple of them hadn't even been to university or an apprenticeship and just started working and then moved their way within their company straight after college. So they've got very different experiences, beliefs, and areas of training. And what we're doing is we're working together with our universities and the Young Council and trying to bridge that gap with the training, because as you're saying, you know, they're asking for one thing, the universities are asking for a certain thing, and industry is asking for another. So what we're seeing is quite a large gap between the two, and you know, the key here is to try and bridge that gap between industry, academia, and through the younger generations. And they are, as you know, as you say, they're the most important because they're the ones who will be driving the sustainability journey as they're going forward. So it's very interesting to make sure that we're training the younger generations to have that at the forefront of their mind, because it's slowly becoming as if we don't want to miss them out. In other words, yeah.
I think that's really interesting, Nikesh, and something I'd certainly personally like to learn more about your young people's organisation or group, and how you get them involved and energised. I think that would be a really valuable thing to take forward in another forum at some point. While you've been talking, there have been some really good posts in the chat from Schneider and Danfoss, which you can all take away with you and study more on the energy efficiency topic. And also, while Nikesh was talking, very topical comment on careers and training from, I think it's Amanda, but I can't see the whole name.
Yeah.
Which says, how can the industry support in encouraging young people into engineering? Well, we've heard one method, which is what Nikesh has had to say. But she says, I started an engineering degree at 37 and I love it. I'm too old to switch careers now, but very much regret not doing it sooner. Well, I mean, my message to that is I'm 69 and I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. But I'd like to hear David and Alan's comments on that as well. I mean, is it too late or are there opportunities?
Never too late. You're in a once in a generation point of change. Yeah. So in Industry 4.0, Electricity 4.0, the digital explosion, the energy crisis, there has never been a more exciting time and more opportunity than engineering and manufacturing offers today, for sure. But certainly not in my working lifetime. And I think the return from, I don't know whether any of you remember it, but there was this thing called COVID a little while back that caused a bit of a hiccup. But I think that gave the working population a great reflection point on resetting. And we've seen so many people transition roles and transition careers. And, I work with the military as an example, trying to translate veterans that are leaving the services and entering civilian life, and translating the language they've known all of their working life into the language we use in industry to try and make those parallels is just one example of how people can transition roles, and they do that at exactly the same kind of age.
And a very good example, isn't it? Because it's about the same age group. And exactly. And I think the other thing that comes to mind is perhaps that the rate of change in technology and manufacturing is so fast that what you did 10 years ago is not quite irrelevant, but it has. It's hard. It's just as hard for people of 37 who've been in manufacturing to keep up as it would be for somebody coming in.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. If anything, it's more difficult if they've been used to a certain pace of change for a long time, and then all of a sudden, in the last 3 or 4 years, the change has really exploded onto the scene. It's tough to keep up. It really is.
Well, let's see if we can help Amanda with her future career prospects.
Well, both Alan and I are hiring, Amanda, so please reach out to us after the call, and we'd be glad to meet with you.
That would be great, and I'm sure that any help would be very much appreciated. Alan, let me come to you just to round this part of the debate off, and then we'll go into your experiences of COP26. Well.
Yeah, totally agree with David. You're never too old and never too young. I remember when I started out in further education, I was doing my OND at the time in electrical and electronics. So I was a couple of years out of school, and they were classed then as mature students. I don't know what you're supposed to say these days, but these two gentlemen were late 50s, had been made redundant, had some money, so they didn't have to work, and they chose to study electrical and electronics formally study, and I can't remember their backgrounds, but they were great role models for young people like the rest of us, where they were in class, they were on time, they were really taking it seriously, they did very, very well in all the theory exams, and they were highly motivated. And I can imagine people like them, or somebody even as old as Amanda, and I know Amanda, so hopefully I can say that, who then brings a different set of experiences into industry. So you can have people who are later stage in their career, who maybe they've been involved in some part of industrial automation, maybe somebody I hired not that long ago is in his 50s, if I can say that. And it was interesting when the person he was taking over from, he was retiring, and we managed to persuade Danfoss, I don't know if it was official or unofficial, to have a transition period, and that sort of knowledge transfer, which made a huge difference. The new person that came in wasn't from a drives background as we know it today. It's much more high performance servos, motion control, high speed comms, super approach and super mindset to really learning. And today he's just performing at such a high level in the world that we work in. So that's somebody who's come in a little bit later, has got a great base background, and is now making such a positive impact to us as colleagues and to our customers. But getting that blended in with people who are a lot younger, I think, is the key, and having that knowledge transfer with some of the people that have had those experiences. And a lot of the best experience you get is on site. You know, I've been fortunate enough to visit maybe, I don't know, 1,000 customer sites in my time, and been involved in things like commissioning steel mills, paper mills, you know, going to these aluminium reduction mills. That was quite scary. You know, having some of that experience blended with the young talent that come in, I think that's part of the key to success. But again, I agree with David, this is the most exciting time. I've been in drives and power electronics for 25 years or something like that. It's the most exciting time I've ever known, because drives are power converters. For me, they're being used in so many different applications. They're not just turning a motor. You know, the whole electrification part, things like microgrids, battery energy storage, renewables, you know, these are sectors that have been there for a very long time. And I've been part of that for a very long time. But see now, the pace in the UK is so exciting. I've never known anything like it. You know, we talk a little bit about power to X, so it could be power to whatever, it could be hydrogen production, it could be renewables, it can be producing lots of different things. This is here and this is happening now. And from my perspective, the UK is at the forefront of a lot of that development work, going into sort of small scale manufacturing, moving into larger scale manufacturing. And for me, and part of my responsibility and the responsibility of my team and the other power converter manufacturers is to support those organizations, which I think will make it even more interesting for the younger people coming out of college or university or school, getting an apprenticeship, but also for people that may be transitioning across from different sectors or different industries. If you've got that right attitude to learn and willingness to learn, you can do it. And there's never been a better time to do it. Absolutely never. It's so exciting, such an exciting period of time for us in the industry, but it's also so relevant, because now instead of having maybe a diesel generator running 24/7 on a building site, there's sort of renovation work going on near my house at the moment. And a couple of months ago, I turned up building a new house, and there was a diesel generator running. It was late Friday afternoon, and the workforce weren't really being totally active, I would say, but that diesel generator is still running to provide electricity when they use their power tools. Nobody was using them. It was noisy, and it was polluting, and it was using fossil fuel. So customers now are using battery energy storage systems for that purpose. They're silent. They're not using any fuel whatsoever. what a transition there in technology by using power converters.
Absolutely. Yeah, and generators themselves, of course, will be using different fuels, won't they? And you know, it seems that talking to a customer in the Middle East a few days ago, and you know, and fuel's relatively cheap, and so is labour out there, as I'm sure you know. But they see probable transition to gas-fired generators as a sort of a middle ground, but ultimately solar and hydrogen will be the power sources that will be used for those sort of applications.
I mean, one thing, just again on trying to attract talent. So within Danfoss Climate Solutions in the UK, so that was formerly the heating and cooling elements of the business. So fantastic people, big organisation, great products that help in energy saving, maybe not so much associated with energy saving, but very much so. And they started a program just prior to COVID, and the team there hired 6 and classed them apprentices, and most of these were postgrads, but there were people that were coming to join Danfoss as an organisation and get involved in the world of climate solutions. And it was really exciting to see how those people, again, just took to this thing, where maybe it's seen as more of a conventional industry, but when you, and like most technologies, when you actually dive into the detail, it's fascinating. And what companies can do now for reducing their carbon footprint, for reducing their energy consumption by using, you know, great quality products, such as from Climate Solutions. So it could be high efficiency valves, condensers, heat recovery units, heat exchangers. You know, there's so much in industry, and I've started to learn more about that as I can, and I can see how we can make a huge difference. And more knowledge that we have of any of us being out on site and our colleagues being out on site and making customers aware of what the possibilities are, it really is an exciting time.
Where you get a new person coming in, and we must move on, but how long do you think it takes for them to get up to speed? I'm thinking of our, you know, apocryphal 37-year-old. How long would she take to get up to speed with a manufacturing industry? Well,
knowing that individual, not very long, because she works really, really hard and she's really, really smart. But it's a tough one, of course. It's all down to application, really. How hard are you willing to work? What effort are you willing to put in? And a lot of it is down to mindset, in my experience. So I would say it depends. In the role as an engineer, so I studied electrical and electronics. I was a young engineer when I eventually left further education. How long did it take me? Quite a while, I would say. Depends on your environment as well. I was very fortunate. I spent some time at GEC at Kidsgrove on a drives application program. That was a year's fully salaried training course to be a drives applications engineer. And then I started learning. So it really is how long's a piece of string. The great thing is there's so much online now as well. So we're not constricted to 9 to 5. You can learn, get more exposure online. But it's down to the environment, I think, too.
I think David, it's a lifetime of learning, right? It's basically what we're describing, because our industry is permanently changing. But it doesn't mean that you need to wait a lifetime before you've got any value to add. The whole point of this is that there are so many different roles and opportunities and learning experiences and different pathways you can take. You can be doing meaningful work in a relatively short space of time. But if your end goal is to be a controls SCADA systems engineer, then I mean, you're talking 10+ years to be, you know, let loose on your own on something complex like that. But you know, if you're going to be lifting and shifting transformers and substations, then I would suggest that we could get you up to speed a lot faster. So it all depends on which career path you're going to take, and that determines it. But what I can guarantee is there is literally opportunity every day to learn something new.
Great. Okay, we must move on. Let's talk briefly then about your experiences at COP26, Alan.
Okay. A few experiences. First of all, it's fantastic. It was hosted in Glasgow's my home city, so really proud that we managed to persuade them to have it in Glasgow. And it was around October, which is when we tend to have the front cover of Drives and Controls. So it was really nice that they positioned COP26 when we had the front cover of Drives and Controls. So thanks to the organisers for that.
And thanks for the plug. We like it.
Yeah, you're welcome. When we started to look at COP26, and it is a little bit of a plug, but it's also very relevant, I think. So we reached out to the facilities management company, it's Honeywell, in the host venues at Glasgow, and we thought that the majority of variable speed drives at COP26 and in those venues where Danfoss or Vacon, so the Vacon brand remains, it's part of the Danfoss organisation and has been for nearly 10 years now. So we went and met with the Honeywell engineers, who were fantastic. They took us around, showed us, a lot of the facilities there behind the scenes. So really exciting actually to go into the plant rooms and find what was 97% of the drives handling the air and the primary and secondary water were Danfoss or Vacon branded drives. So we then had the opportunity to understand that, what functions are those drives actually doing in bringing in clean air. Remember, this was a period of, concern over COVID still. So bringing in the clean air and then expelling that out into the atmosphere or treating it and then moving the hot water around. So we get the chance to understand how much energy saving. So it was a case in point. If you've got COP26, we're trying to save the planet. I'm really pleased to see that a lot of the buildings already had variable speed drives fitted, and Honeywell, I have to say, managed those facilities really, really well. They were absolutely on top of making sure that the drives were set up correctly, they're applied correctly, and we highlighted a few potential areas where they could actually do some different things. So that was great to put technology into COP26. On visiting, I think the things that struck me, the mix of demographic was quite broad, and the geographies from where people had come from was fantastic to see. It really was a truly international event. I was fortunate enough to meet people from lots of different countries, but again, talking about that demographic, a lot of younger people that were there talking about the environment. So those were some of the real positives, some interesting things to see. I think JCB were there, showing their hydrogen-powered backhoe loader. There was quite a lot of electrification, hybridization, and use of hydrogen was quite topical. One thing that I'll never forget was when I left one of the main venues and was walking away, a lot of these were powered by diesel generators. The COP26 is powered by diesel generators. I mean,
oh dear.
I was a bit disappointed, shall we say, because there are alternatives. So those are some of my lasting memories. What I really wanted out of COP26 was something from the politicians to say, here are some real actions we're going to take, and they're going to stick, and we're going to make these happen. And they're not kind of in my line of sight, unfortunately. So apologies for those that have been implemented and have been implemented, but overall fantastic experience, to see that mix of people from different backgrounds and nationalities that really were passionate about this massive problem that we've got. Some of the companies exhibiting fantastic technologies, really fantastic technologies, but we're still being powered by diesel gen sets.
So there was quite a lot of engineering presence then.
Yes.
I mean, which is encouraging, and but perhaps a difficulty of melding the political side to the engineering side, and never the twain shall meet.
And I think that's still, and I think my panelists might agree. I think that's one of the big challenges that we've got within the UK and in other countries is how do we get the political side to really understand the potential of organisations like ours to maybe give that guidance and that input so that we can do things better, and saving a lot of time and saving a lot of money to get there a lot quicker, because the problems are here and now.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, one of the key takeaways that perhaps you might like to quickly comment on that, Nikesh. I mean, how do we get politicians to understand all the great works that our businesses are doing?
Yeah, it's a difficult feat for anyone. We're trying on a daily basis. We have quite close links to all the different government groups, including the new base, as they like to call it, the new department for net zero. And really and truly, we do, as a trade association, you know, we provide collective responses to all their consultations on different areas of the energy transformation list, for example, energy technology list, where they get together data from manufacturers about, you know, how best to improve the production and how best manufacturers' products can be energy efficient, looking at different areas like that. And you know, I've mentioned it before that there are times where it is often the decision makers who don't normally have the full understanding of the products that manufacturers are producing to be able to create the same line of what's required and what they would like to be done, what they would like to be achieved, and what needs to be required of often two different decision makers. So that can sometimes create quite a grey area for what they would like to achieve and what manufacturers can actually deliver. And I think the fundamental understanding of the products, such as variable speed drives, soft starters, these sorts of products, that needs to be understood a bit better by the government organizations before they can start getting them to act. But yeah, it's working, and we're constantly working together with our member companies to try and send that message across. So you know, it's one of those things where perseverance is key.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to that towards the end of our webinar. But David, I think it's time for you to give your scheduled presentation, as such we have, and it's really about the data-driven insights and the importance of digitization in the whole energy efficiency debate.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Andy. And I've listened to pretty much most of the topic points have come up today, I think, in the conversation so far. I mean, Alan, you just pointed out a really great one, which is efficient building management. So what you witnessed in COP26, you know, a well-run building can be 40 to 50% more efficient than a badly run building. Now, I mean, that's rough average, let's say 300 kilowatts per hour per square meter versus anything down to 180, 160 to 180, which makes a huge difference. And that's another one of those, you know, all the technology is probably in most buildings that you work in, but whether it's effectively used or not is the key. So I think, Andy, I mean, the bits I've probably not touched on so much would be, I talked about setting a baseline, understanding where you are, and there's a number of ways of doing it. We, and me personally, are a firm believer that you can't have sustainability without digitization. I don't believe it's possible, and it's certainly not going to be its most effective in our industries. So you have to have a baseline, and you have to know where you are to be able to understand and set goals and ambitions on where you want to get to, and really understand what's possible. More importantly, what's the return on investment for you in doing that? You know, is it meeting a regulatory demand like net zero by 2050? Is it to meet a legal requirement like I have an up-to-date single line diagram for my manufacturing facility, and everything else in between, or I want to remove cost or optimize my operation so I can remain viable as a business. So that baseline piece is really important, because once you've understood the baseline, then you don't stand a chance unless you understand what is possible to change. So that's where that measurement piece comes in. And we can do a number of different things. I spoke in the chat earlier about the baseline assessments. you know, there's a number of companies, not just the Schneider thing, but obviously I'm going to recommend Schneider, that are offering either free or, you know, subsidized energy assessment audits. And that's a great starting point, depending on how deep it goes, because there's energy audits of a facility, and then there's down to that granular detail that I was talking about earlier, which was really interesting. And I was hoping the poll was going to come back the way you showed it, because that's 99% of the time. Most people know where they are from a cost standpoint. Very few have any idea on where or what, and what's the most efficient place to start. You know, is it the heating? Is it the manufacturing? Is it the building? Is it the fleet? You know, there's so many different areas that impact the energy cost bill, and really understanding what you can do at the least amount of cost to make some headway to stave off some of the issues. And whether that's the sourcing, I don't know whether anyone replied on what their cost of energy was. I didn't spot that, but that's a really great point, is how are you sourcing your energy? Where do you source your energy from? How protected are you? Do you use PPAs, or are you stuck into a contract? When does that contract end? What's the impact of when that contract ends? So there's a number of different topic points that you can go through very quickly. There's an online assessment tool as well, that allows you then to understand where you are. And I said earlier about, you know, 80–90% of every facility we go into has tons of equipment that's not connected. And the minute it's not connected, it just goes into the other bucket on your energy bill, and it gets thrown in with everything else, and you have no way of addressing it, not efficiently, at least, not without a lot of manpower or a lot of time. So now, once we've got that measurement and monitoring piece in place, then you can start that automation and control piece, a bit like Alan was talking about. It's one thing having variable speed drives installed, it's another thing optimizing them. And they don't stay optimized, because they're driving something that's electromechanical. And guess what? Electromechanical over time changes, and it has to adapt. Now you've got two ways of doing that. You can pay someone once a year to come in and physically do the 40-year-old planned preventative maintenance approach on it. Or you can digitize, connect it, and ask someone like Danfoss to do it remotely. Other drives are available from other manufacturers, by the way, for anyone that's interested. But the point is, that's the technology enabler, but that's also how you tackle some of these, you know, recruitment issues and retention issues that we're talking about, having those skilled resources. Once you've got that in place, you can put clever things in, like energy management software that sits like an umbrella across your facility, because once you've started connecting all of these dots, you need to visualize it in a way that makes sense, so that you can consume that data and actually make data-driven decisions off the back of it. Once you've made those data-driven decisions, you also need to see the benefit of it. And on some complex facilities, and I think you spoke about aluminium smelting earlier, which is a really great example, that seems on paper to be quite simple. You melt some billets and you extrude, or you press, or you mold some aluminium, but it's actually a really complex process for anyone that's interested. And you need a huge amount of data to be able to control the process. And they will not make a single change without modeling ahead of schedule and understanding what the net impact could be, because if they screw up, it can cost millions to recover from. So that data landscape, that picture, or that pane of glass that you can look through, only becomes possible when you connect and when you analyze and when you set yourself a baseline to work from. So I think that's probably the big piece. You know, that data-driven approach, you have to work from fact. Running on gut feel and looking for the biggest thing that's got the largest amount of smoke coming from it is not an effective way of using what limited resources we've got. And if we deploy our energy that we use today in a smart way, we have so much potential for energy savings. If all of us saved 20%, we literally don't have an energy problem for the next 10 years. And we know that we can save you 40–50+% today. So there's huge opportunity for us to protect the economy as well as our businesses and livelihoods as well.
I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, 20%, I mean, even on the 80–20 rule, that should be pretty straightforward for most industries, one would think.
Exactly.
Can you tell us a little bit about the associate consultancy program? Because I'm conscious of what's appearing in the chat at the same time. There's some really excellent material coming in from both
Oh,
Schneider
great.
and Danfoss.
Okay.
I just wondered if you could explain a bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues that our customers are facing is I go and meet with all sorts of wonderful customers, a bit like Alan does, and some of them present me with wonderful pathways to net zero, and they've got these strategic sustainability goals, and they often, once they get down into the nitty gritty of, okay, I've got this ambition and this aspiration, and these are my green credentials, then the question comes is, okay, so how do I do it? And that's where Schneider's consultancy business around sustainability is just, I literally cannot hire enough in that space, and it wouldn't matter how many I hired, I wouldn't meet the demand across our customer base now. So to address exactly what we were talking about earlier, the skills gap, is we recognized very early on that we'd become part of the problem. We were relying on the industry to have built up, find these individuals that have got the 30 years experience and then hire them from Alan or whoever else as quickly as we could to fill our need. Whereas actually we had a responsibility to create our own. So we started the associate consultancy program, where it can be grads, it can be apprentices, it can be Amanda, if you're interested. It can be anyone that wants to transition. We create this associate consultancy role, and you basically shadow and go on that learning journey with our experienced consultants. And we've just taken that another step forward in industry, particularly around smart factory, where we've invested in a few guys now. We're sending on a 10-month intensive training course in our smart factories in France, to really learn how you move from that last 40 years that we've all lived through into what's the next 40 years look like. And one of those is transitioning out of the armed services. Another one is coming out of the graduate program. So absolutely green as grass, the pair of them. So we're running a bit of an experiment with those guys as well to see whether we can do our bit to accelerate the knowledge base within our industry.
Thank you. It's time for you, Alan, to sort of take that forward and talk about some of the actual technologies, perhaps, that are behind the potential savings that are available. After that, we've got a number of good comments and questions that have come in, which I will acknowledge and then take at the end as a mutual discussion opportunity.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, I think David makes so many great points. One thing I would say is we can very simply make some really significant energy savings by applying variable speed drives correctly. So we know fine well it's a cupola running on a centrifugal fan or a pump, and many of them are still running off a fixed speed starter, so a direct online start delta. You fit a variable speed drive correctly, and David's absolutely right, the motors as well, if you've had one in for a while, it may well need to be sort of reset up. But reducing the speed, generally speaking, by around 20%, you'll save around 50% of electricity. That's just how it works. It's as simple as that. So we did an application recently. It was it's an institution. They've got lots and lots of variable speed drives already fitted, and they looked at fitting another one, simple 30 kilowatt fan motor, and we just put into our energy audit template. So we've got a simple model when we're carrying out. I like simple things when we're carrying out an energy audit, and I think this was running, it's only 5 days a week, 12 hours a day, and reduced the speed to 80%, and at 10 pence per kilowatt hour, the return on investment was just over 1 year, and it saved 10 tons of CO2 in a year. There you go. So anybody out there that's got 30 kilowatt, 15 kilowatt, a little bit more, a little bit less, by all means, please consider, and it's one of the things I'll mention later, but I'd really like to the audience to consider is having companies like yourselves or others like Schneider, responsible companies who can provide an energy audit and make sure that we understand what we have in our respective facilities, Are they running on fixed speed? Is variable speed the right thing to do? It isn't always the right thing to do. Sometimes a soft starter, if you are going to just run at fixed speed and it's set up correctly, a soft starter is the right approach. But generally speaking, you will get significant energy saving, even in a constant torque application. If you're running conveyor systems and you, typically because of process, you need to reduce the speed anyway, instead of using mechanical gearbox, you can use variable speed drives. You reduce the speed by 20%, broad brush, you'll make a 20% energy saving. So there's so many applications that the application of a variable speed drive, quite simply, will make significant energy savings. So that's one point, but I really like what David's saying. You know, the more we understand by measuring, by putting these systems in, I think Schneider's a very progressive company when it comes to these sorts of areas. Really, really progressive, got a suite of tools that they can use for our customers' benefit, whether they use our variable speed drives or Schneider's or whoever. You know, the most important thing for me is how do we help UK and Ireland PLC to become as cost effective, as competitive with other markets? How do we enable our customers to not just stay in the game, but to really prosper? And I think by investing in the latest technologies, that's a great step forward. So for me, you know, there's many other case stories we've done with regards to energy audits, but we've got around 100 people in the UK in our partner network and in Danfoss organisation in variable speed drives. They're drives experts, and we're really keen to be able to help people to understand what the potentials are. You know, there's going to be more of a push, I think, on providing your path to carbon neutrality and ultimately to net zero. And just by providing an energy audit document, you've got a bit of a pathway to do that. So again, really, really encourage people, if you are interested in having an energy audit, reach out to myself, you know, reach out to us as a panel, and let's get those things started. I saw a question in the chat there. What steps are we taking for us to become net zero? Fantastic question. One thing that Danfoss has done, our Norborg headquarters in Denmark. So it's a group of manufacturing facilities and offices. It's our headquarters. It's 250,000 square meter facility. I think it was 2015. It was entirely driven by fossil fuels. Okay, so we had an aspiration then to become net zero, carbon neutral by, and I can't remember what year it was, to be perfectly honest. We achieved it by the end of 2022. So that entire facility is carbon neutral with the plan to get to net zero. And I think it's by 2030, we're looking to get our entire operation as carbon neutral. So I think companies like ourselves, and I'm sure Schneider, we really are investing in our own technologies and complementary technologies as well. We don't manufacture heat pumps, for example, but we supply a lot of the controls and the valves that go into a heat pump system. There's some discussion at the moment you see on social media and the news about domestic heat pumps. I'm not an expert in heat pumps, I'm really not. But from what I read and from what I hear from my colleagues, certainly if you look at industrial heat pumps, really make a lot of sense. They really, really do make a big difference. So we're employing technologies such as those as well to help us continue on that journey ultimately to net zero, but at the moment onto carbon neutrality. I think another point I wanted to mention with regards to variable speed drives is, you know, not one approach fits all. So we've had a couple of instances where we've been asked to look at a site. Now we've got a couple of different topologies, one being a conventional 6-pulse variable speed drive that generally we would fit with an active filter for harmonic mitigation, if that's an issue. But we also have active front-end drives, so effectively back-to-back inverters. So they were developed a long time ago, actually, typically for hoisting applications. So recapturing the energy on a crane or an elevator, when the load comes down, you can capture that energy instead of dissipating it. but they are also effective for harmonic cancellation. A couple of big projects we've looked at, and we've done the study of 6-pulse and active filter versus our active front end low harmonic drive or alternative low harmonic drive. And the energy savings that we've found have been so significant, not just in reducing the speed, but actually the 6-pulse and active filter being more efficient. And one project, our calculation was over the 20-year lifetime that we'd expect the system to run for, the saving was nearly £600,000 at 10 pence per kilowatt hour. £600,000, not just by reducing the speed, by choosing the right topology of 6-pulse and active filter. So, you know, there's a message there. We have active front end low harmonic drives. We try to apply them where we feel it's the right place to apply them, not everywhere. So it's great to have that mix of approaches. I think those points, and again, the point that David made, motors generally degrade over time, or say you've got a drive with a motor and the motor has either been rewound or has been replaced. What I'm conscious of is the drive generally may well need slightly retuned to work with that new motor or that rewound motor. So companies like ourselves have features in the drives by doing that, effectively a motor identification run, do that and you can save up to 5%. So it's making sure that you continue to engage with maybe your service provider or the manufacturer, such as ourselves, to find out what are the things that we can do to really optimize efficiency, whether it's fitting a variable speed drive in the first place, commissioning it correctly. If you've had an upgrade, making sure again the drive's commissioned correctly, and choosing the right approach. Is it 6-pulse? Is it active front end? And just generally getting that advice. And then going back to David's point again, how do we measure those things? Ideally, we make further investment. We go to a lot of our competitors, and when I say competitors, I'm talking about other countries. This is UK PLC trying to stay ahead of the other countries. You know, they will be investing in these latest generation technologies to try to make sure that they are as energy efficient. And I think about even OEMs, you know, for me, the smart OEMs are the ones that are investing in the latest technology that can then have that as part of their value proposition to say, our systems provide this level of efficiency for you, Mr. or Mrs. end user. And, you know, sometimes it can be overlooked. I think the smart ones are doing it already. And why wouldn't you? It's investing in being able to measure and control and optimize, because then that's a real selling point over the ones that maybe don't do that. So it's a huge subject, Andy. You know, there's just so much to discuss on it. And one last point, if I can, is mentioned briefly earlier about heat recovery. You know, there is so much heat wasted by, I think data centers globally account for something like 1% of electricity demand. You know, I think the UK, according to IEA, the EU 27 in UK for data centers in 2020, that accounted for 3.5% of the electricity demand in the region. So there's a lot of electricity consumed, there's a lot of heat. And I think that heat can be captured and reused as well. I think one of my colleagues might put in the chat, we've published a couple of white papers, and one is on excess heat. And the other one is on the demand side. And the demand side really is, what is our demand? You know, the backdrop for myself says the greenest energy is the energy we don't use. Yeah. And we just switch it off. You know, that's the best thing, really. That's our ultimate energy saving. And whoever come up with that slogan, it's just brilliant. We did it for the IEA conference last year, and it's absolutely brilliant. And if nothing else, if people can take that away with themselves today, the greenest energy is the energy we don't use. Then
got that. Thank you very much, Alan. I must comment on there's a couple of questions which you've answered. One of them, which from Tony, which says, have the soaring energy prices resulted in a corresponding increase in and take up of proven energy saving technologies such as variable speed drives. Well, given the savings you've quoted, it'd be pretty sad if they haven't, but maybe they haven't as much as they should have been. And you know, looking at the energy audit poll, well, nobody's had an energy audit, so so there's a lot of potential there. So I thought I'd just ask for David's comments on those two things, and also, you know, Schneider's internal processes, which I know you've answered a specific question in the chat about.
Okay, so just to comment on what Alan's just said, because every example he just gave us is answering the one big question in the room, which is we don't need to wait for anything. All of the technology that we need to be able to meet our cost reduction goals, or stave off our resilience concerns we've got about grid capacity, or meet our climate ambitions, we've got all of the technology in industry to do what we need to do today. We don't have to wait for anything to be invented. From a Schneider standpoint, we've been a bit of a broken record, Andy, for the last 25 years, when long before it was fashionable, long before the next generation, as you talked about earlier, kind of took up the mantle and the responsibility, we were one of the oddballs out there that were banging on about it. So we've got a bit of a track record on it. Doesn't say that we're perfect, by the way, because we're not, and we openly show you where we are and where we are not perfect, because we are a big machine. You know, just from a health and safety standpoint, I'm responsible for over 4,000 people in just the UK and Ireland. So when you start to scale that up to the 160 odd thousand employees that Schneider have got globally, it suddenly becomes a real challenge when even talking about the emissions from our vehicles. Now we're transitioning to electrification of our fleet as an example, but you don't do that overnight. And anyone that drives an electric vehicle in the UK, Ireland or Scotland will know very well how challenging that can be with the infrastructure in one of the world's most modern and advanced grids, by the way. And ours is 60 years old. So that just says it all, doesn't it? So globally, we're not ready for a lot of these challenges. We're trying to take a very pragmatic approach to it. So why sit there waving your arms and wringing your hands saying, I can't do it because, what can you do? And reprioritize based on what you can do. And that's kind of the Schneider approach at a very high level. But I put the link into anyone that's really interested in the detail. We can talk all day on that topic. And and I'm more than happy to share with you.
Thank you. Nikesh, there's a couple of things that have come up, which is the issue of people's internal energy performance, and also the issue of how many people have taken energy audits. Are those questions that you have information about from your association members, or is that something perhaps you could explore for us?
So that's exactly what we're looking at exploring. How many, by getting our members to fill out the current survey that we've launched yesterday, that will open our eyes to how many of our members are doing exactly the poll questions that Alan and David have asked. So, you know, how many are aware of where their biggest energy wastage is? How many are currently doing something about it? How many have taken the steps to look at their carbon emissions or know where their leakages are? So these questions will then, we've created a set of industry averages to compare them against. So then what we can do is we can look at comparing all of our member companies to industry averages and seeing, you know, we do like to believe we cover about 85% of the industry from our member companies. So that's a fair coverage of what we're looking to expect. So from that data, we'd like to then establish, you know, where the gaps in the market are and what we can do, because a lot of the time what we find amongst our member companies is one member might have a solution to another member's problem. And that's always the key, you know, that's what we find as a trade association, which is the beauty of having what you'd say competitors sitting together, when realistically everybody's got the same ulterior goal, the same motive, the same reason for why we're doing what we're doing and what industry should be doing, you know, they all encompassed under the same goals. So it's nice to see from an outside perspective, from a trade association's perspective, and then when we get together and discuss and do these sorts of sustainability group meetings, we realize that, you know, all of these manufacturers have the same goal in mind. Let's get together and create the best way to tackle these problems. And, you know, the similarities in what David and Alan have been discussing today shows exactly that. So it's a really good way to sing the praise of the industry and keep doing it and doing it more. Because, you know, if we stop now, you know, we fall behind other countries, and we want to create that competitiveness for the UK, especially now we're separate from anybody else that we were previously linked to. So,
okay. When will information be available from that source, and how much of it are you able to share?
I mean, we should be sharing them on a regular basis on our social media platforms. We'll be able to release the results of that, and we'll be able to share that amongst our membership, given that's okay with those inputting the information. I'd give it a few weeks or so for people to respond.
So it's imminent. Yeah. So
yeah,
it should be very
imminent.
relevant to this presentation. So it'd be good to get that information onto our LinkedIn page, for example, so that we can share it with everybody that follows this, which would be good.
Yeah, definitely. I think some of the questions that are being asked will be quite prevalent here, in the sense that when you said the different sizes of businesses, some businesses might have easier access to that sort of information than others. So others might have to dig a little bit deeper to get the exact information that we're asking from out of it. So it will be interesting to see, you know, where the information comes from, and then obviously the accuracy of the data as well is always very important to us. So yeah, we'll keep you posted on how quickly we can get that.
Yes, please do. I'm sure everyone will be keen to hear. Yeah, lovely. Okay, we're moving smoothly into overtime. So there's a couple of comments that came in earlier, which I'll report on and ask you to comment on one, and then we'll go into our kind of final round robin questions. The first one says, good to see that change and more young people are coming into our industry, which we'd all support, obviously. From my experience before COVID, when I was on the road more, it was difficult to find young age people working with drives. And we seem to feel that's beginning to change. And COVID might have been, I think the term was an inflection point. So that will continue to happen. The second comment is about renewables, and it says it's from Ivona, and it says every development we work on depends on something that has happened beforehand. Electrification depends on renewable energy, mostly fission, fusion, who knows, energy which does not require wind and sun. Every development requires, well, I suppose certainly some do, a decommissioning plan to make sure we do not generate more waste. So I think what's behind the question is to say, if we move towards other forms of energy, are we creating a waste problem in certain circumstances? I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that. Maybe quickly go round.
I'll take a stab at that. So yes and no. I think the global supply chain challenges that every manufacturer has faced in the last couple of years, and continues to face in some industries and some segments, has forced manufacturers to take a long, hard look at circularity and what it actually means. And I think you will see over the next 10 to 20 years a significant increase in the uptake of reuse and repurposing of equipment. And that doesn't necessarily mean reusing and repurposing in your facility, but maybe it being reused and repurposed for another facility. So certainly at Schneider, we have factories dedicated to the repurposing and reuse of equipment that we manufactured, maybe as long as 20, 30 years ago. So we call that EcoFit, but it's basically remanufacturing in its purest form, where companies and customers are coming to us, asking us to add smart sensoring technology or whatever else it is that they require, and then repurpose and reuse that on a facility. So I think you're going to see, purely because of lead times and the pressures and the need for change so fast, manufacturers aren't going to be able to make everything new, and we are not going to be able to consciously throw all of that into landfill. So I think you're going to see a significant change in the way people approach our industry in the future now.
Alan?
Very much agree. I think the other thing as well, as David mentioned earlier, we can't allow that really important thing to stop us from investing in saving energy and reducing our carbon footprint, but we have to be really mindful. And it's great to see, I think, so many responsible manufacturers now taking it so seriously and investing, as David says, you know, in whole factories, for example, to repurpose. So yeah, it's something that's extremely important to be aware of and plan for, but still to move forward at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Nikesh, I mean, measuring this is pretty difficult, isn't it? When you're in a circular chain, I mean, exactly what is happening and where is it going, and so on. I mean, that perhaps is something that, you know, you mentioned that you have relationships between member companies. I mean, maybe, you know, that you could almost create a circular economy within them in certain cases, perhaps. But how do you measure what's happening in those sort of circumstances?
That's the idea, to bring different manufacturers' ideas together. You know, how do you measure it? Each individual manufacturer might have a different idea, and that's why we create that forum of where you can get together and discuss it. And we're seeing some promising ideas. You know, that the young group I mentioned earlier, the Young Council, they are joining together with the Sustainability Group, which is already existing at GAMBICA. So we've got the young group mixing with the older generation to work together on both ideas, which is really, really nice. And as you mentioned, I think it was a question in the chat about younger generations not being involved in drives, and that's something we also noticed. And it's not just drives, other areas that we're involved with, control gear, switch gear. It's not usually seen as an attractive industry, but that's changing, and that's because of these benefits that are becoming prevalent, and people are starting to see the benefits of these technologies and what they can actually do to help industry with, and that's why it's increasing that involvement in different areas. So it's quite promising. Very promising.
Right. Well, let's just finish with a sort of wider curveball type question, and it's stimulated by actually Amanda, who commented that it has been 18 months since COP26, and has interest been kept in the UK, or has it been forgotten? And sort of aligned to that, is it going to be industry which drives? We talked about this briefly yesterday. Is industry going to be the driver of net zero and energy efficiency, or can we afford to leave it to the politicians? You know, those people at COP26 that were difficult to mix with. You know, and how do we make sure that industry has its voice and actually makes things happen? So I'm going to kick off with David, and then Alan and Nikesh, and that will be our last question.
So I draw your attention to the previous 3 industrial revolutions and ask, what part did the governments of the day or the education systems of the day play a part in any of those last 3 industrial revolutions? You've got your answer right there.
That'll do. Alan.
I had considered a term, but because this is live and could go out anywhere, I'm not going to use it to mention with regards to the governments. But, you know, I think together is the real way to try and get it. I'm really hoping that politicians are much more aware now, and they're being impacted. You know, we see the TV images in different parts of the world. When we're causing climate change in any country, that's not just affecting us, that's affecting particularly the people that don't have the financial resources to take some of the steps that we can take. We're so fortunate in the UK. We're so fortunate, and there's so many other less fortunate nations than us and less fortunate individuals. You know, I just saw the news this morning in Malawi, they just had this terrible storms. And those people, goodness me, that's tragic. That's absolutely tragic. And these sorts of events that some can't be helped, but we see the heating, we see the really, really high temperatures in different parts of the world. We all have to be part of that. And I really hope that the politicians, as people that can make that policy, are aware of that. Totally agree with David, though. You know, look at what's happened in the previous industrial revolutions, and, you know, I could say greed is part of that. You know, why would you want to automate? Because you can make more money, and that's better. But there's been a lot of responsible industrialists as well in the past who have, Andrew Carnegie, for example, originally from Dunfermline. I think he was something like the world's second richest person of all time. And in my hometown and in many towns, there's Carnegie libraries. You know, the good work that industrialist did is still with us today. So I think it really is a blend. You know, one of the things for me as well is media. So I'll put this back to yourselves. So the part that media plays in all this, I watched the news and News at 10 the other night. The first, I think it was a 30-minute show, and more than 10 minutes was talking about Gary Lineker.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's more important things to talk about than Match of the Day. I'm sorry, because the bank in the States, the Silicon Valley Bank, that's that came after Gary Lineker. That's much more impactful on us. So I think you guys have got your part to play. I'm going to blame Nikesh as well, because he's the one that's meant to speak to the government and persuade the government. We've all got such a big part to play. We really do. And we need to do it together. I think just getting on board together and seeing with common purpose, and then we'll all benefit from it.
Okay, excuse me. Well, in the interest of symmetry, Nikesh, you started, so you can finish. How are you going to help us get better information through to politicians and get them to listen?
Absolutely. No, I think Alan's completely correct there. It's not one source. It's got to be everyone all together. You know, it's all of us have a part to play. Ourselves at GAMBICA, you know, we won't give up. We're constantly speaking to government in all different directions. I mean, the UK CA mark was one example of that. You know, we fought very, very hard to get the extension for many of the manufacturers that are member companies, and we were granted that on more than one occasion. And yes, while the desired outcome wasn't necessarily achieved in the first place, it's now in a much better position than it was when we first started. So, you know, steps like that can be achieved. And, you know, while sometimes trying to get what we want in industry is like trying to draw blood from stone, we'll still keep trying. You know, there's no reason why, with the help of the media, the help of the younger generations, the help of our manufacturers, why we all together can't do this. The trade associations at the forefront of that. You know, we will send the message of our manufacturers to the government, and that's the best way we can continue to do so. Getting involved in all of these different consultations. I mean, tomorrow will be a big eye-opener for us to see whether or not there is major investment in the manufacturing sector or not, looking at the budget coming out. So that will be important for all of us, and that will be a good way for us to then set something for the next 6 months to a year going ahead. So hopefully there's good signs there. And if there's not, again, we'll be back on their shoulder. I'm sure we'll be knocking on their door, trying to get them to help with the funding side of things, let alone the policy. So we'll keep trying.
Yes, very much so. Well, thank you for that. And yes, on that at least semi-optimistic note, and we'll continue to network and push for the industries that we've dedicated our lives to. So hopefully we'll be able to make a major contribution to the future of the planet, and we'll keep working on it. And at least as a member of the technical media, which I would distinguish from the news media, we will certainly be doing that. Before we close then, I'd just like to hand over quickly to my colleague Andy, who'll talk about another networking event, which is Talking Industry Live, coming up in April.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and thank you to all of our panelists and delegates for joining us today. Alan, I think you sort of threw the gauntlet down there to us as the media, so challenge accepted in a sense. So Talking Industry actually, in its conception, was to sort of get a panel discussion group together to discuss some of the most pressing issues of our industry today. So net zero is certainly one of those, and we'll be covering a few more of those at our live event on the 25th of April at the MTC. So we'd like to extend an opportunity to everyone on the panel and our viewers today to join us there. And really our motto is to learn, grow and connect, and through open discussion in this kind of format, we really believe that we can play our part in the industry as the media to accelerate some of the digital transitions and tackle some of our greatest issues. So again, that's 25th of April. Please feel free to join us, everyone. We'd love to see you there.
Thank you very much for that, Andy. And yes, again, I'll extend my invitation. Look forward to seeing as many of you as possible. So with that, thank you very much indeed for our panelists. We had a really good discussion, I think. Let's keep it running in all kinds of communication means that we have, not least our LinkedIn facility. There will be an on-demand version of the discussion we've had and podcasts made from it as well, so they'll be pushed out over the next month or so to an extensive audience based on our circulation. So again, thanks ever so much for everybody, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.